What would you do if the people you loved most became the ones who tried to destroy you? Today on Her Shattered Voices, you'll hear a story that will break your heart and test your faith in family. But before we begin, I want to know your voice too. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in her place? And if this story touches you even a little, don't forget to like this video so more people can hear her shattered voice. It was supposed to be Christmas, the season of warmth, family, and celebration. But in my house it had become nothing more than a battlefield dressed up in holiday decorations. The garlands sparkled, the giant tree glittered with gold ornaments, and the smell of cinnamon candles filled the air. Yet beneath the surface, tension clung tighter than tinsel. For weeks I'd been running myself ragged, grocery lists as long as my arm, scrubbing every corner of a house that was no longer my own sanctuary, wrapping gifts I hadn't even been asked if I wanted to buy. But the final straw came that morning when my daughter-in-law, Kristen, stood in the kitchen, arms folded across her designer sweater, her lips pressed into a thin line of authority that left no room for negotiation. "You'll be cooking Christmas dinner this year, Margaret," she announced, her voice sharp and clipped as though she were issuing an order to an employee rather than speaking to her husband's mother. "And not just for us. I've invited the whole extended family. 40 people. You'll handle it." Her words hit me like a slap, though she hadn't laid a finger on me. 40 people. Alone. The sheer audacity of it rolled over me in waves of disbelief. For a moment I thought she was joking. My tired hands clutched the edge of the counter, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was kidding, but the smirk on her face told me she meant every syllable. "Kristen," I began softly, searching for some rationality in her eyes. 40 people? That's not a dinner, that's a banquet. I can't do that by myself." She tilted her head, her manicured nails drumming against her folded arms. "You've cooked plenty of big meals before. Don't act like this is new. Besides, everyone expects it. You wouldn't want to disappoint the family at Christmas, would you?" The manipulation was subtle, but I'd been living under her thumb long enough to recognize it. Every request disguised as duty, every demand cloaked in guilt. My son Robert, her husband, wasn't even in the room. He never was when Kristen decided to flex her authority over me. He'd conveniently vanished into his study, leaving me to absorb the blow. Something inside me cracked that morning. For 4 years since my husband, Frank, passed away, I had given and given my time, my savings, my labor, my very sense of self, all in the name of being useful, of keeping the family together. I moved into their house thinking I was needed, that I was helping. But slowly the help turned into servitude. I wasn't Margaret anymore. I was the live-in cook, the cleaner, the babysitter, the woman who made their lives run smoothly while mine faded into invisibility. I looked at Kristen, her eyes already dismissing me as if my feelings were irrelevant, and for the first time I saw her clearly, not as my son's wife, not as the mother of my grandchildren, but as the warden of the gilded cage I had allowed myself to be locked inside. My chest tightened. 40 people. I imagined the days leading up to Christmas, my hands raw from chopping, my back aching from hours at the stove. No thank you at the end of it, just more expectation piled on top of exhaustion. I pictured myself standing at the sink at midnight, scrubbing greasy pans while everyone else laughed in the living room with full bellies and glasses of wine. And I knew, with a clarity that startled me, that if I agreed, if I said yes again, it would never end. Kristen raised an eyebrow. "So, do we have an understanding? You'll handle it." I opened my mouth and the word yes nearly slipped out, the same word I'd been conditioned to say for years. But then something shifted. My hand brushed against the counter where I'd left a stack of envelopes, bills, receipts, things I wasn't supposed to care about but had quietly collected. And in that simple motion I remembered Frank. I remembered the promise he had made before he died, the way he'd clasped my hand in the hospital bed and whispered, "Don't let them take your life away, Margaret. Promise me you'll live." I had broken that promise for 4 years. But maybe, just maybe, I could still keep it. I straightened my shoulders, meeting Kristen's gaze with a steadiness that surprised even me. "No," I said firmly. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Her eyes widened, not because she hadn't heard it before, but because she had never expected to hear it from me. "No?" she repeated as though the concept were foreign. "No," I said again, louder this time. "I will not cook Christmas dinner for 40 people. I will not spend another holiday breaking my back while everyone else enjoys themselves. I won't do it." For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. Then her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Fine. Don't cook. But don't expect to sit at the table either. If you won't contribute, then you're not needed. The cruelty was sharp, deliberate, designed to wound. And it did. My heart ached, not just from her words but from the realization that this was how little I meant to her. To them. I was disposable, a servant whose only worth was in what I could provide. I left the kitchen before she could see my tears. Upstairs, in the small guest room that had become my prison, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the suitcase in the corner. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The zipper's rasp echoed in the silence, and suddenly, I knew exactly what I had to do. For hours, I moved like a woman possessed. I folded clothes, tucked away essentials, slipped in the few personal treasures I hadn't already surrendered. With each item packed, I felt lighter, as though the weight of servitude was peeling away piece by piece. When the suitcase was full, I sat back and stared at it, my heart hammering. Could I really do this? Could I really walk away, leave everything and everyone behind? I thought of Robert, my son, who had once been the boy who ran to me for comfort, who had once promised he'd take care of me. Where was that boy now? Buried under Kristen's control, blinded by her charm. If I stayed, he would never see me again. He would only see the servant his wife had turned me into. And so I made the decision. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't write a note. I simply wheeled my suitcase down the hall, out the front door, and into the crisp December air. The street was quiet, the world still unaware that a revolution was taking place. Not in politics, not in history, but in the heart of a 64-year-old woman who had finally had enough. To the airport, I bought a one-way ticket to Hawaii. My hand shook as I handed over my credit card, but when the attendant smiled and handed me my boarding pass, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. On the plane, as the engines roared and the ground fell away beneath me, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Kristen." For the first time in a long time, the words didn't feel like a burden. They felt like a promise, not to her but to myself. A promise that this Christmas I would finally give myself the gift I had been denied for too long, the gift of choice. And I had chosen to fly. The moment the plane's wheels touched down on the Honolulu runway, I felt the shift in my chest, as if the island itself had inhaled my pain and exhaled something lighter, freer. Through the oval window, I caught sight of swaying palm trees, sunlight glinting across endless blue water, and a skyline so different from the gray suburban streets I had left behind. For the first time in years, I wasn't arriving somewhere to serve, to fix, to be useful. I was arriving simply for me. The other passengers bustled around, eager to collect luggage and get to their resorts, but I lingered, savoring the hum of voices, the warmth that seeped into the cabin the moment the doors opened. When I finally stepped onto the jet bridge, the air wrapped around me like a soft blanket, warm, fragrant with salt and flowers. I closed my eyes for just a moment and whispered, "Frank, I made it." Inside the terminal, a group of greeters handed out flower leis to arriving tourists. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, placed a garland around my neck. The soft petals brushed against my skin, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. It wasn't just a lei, it was a welcome, a reminder that here I was not invisible. Here I could exist without being reduced to what I could provide. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I navigated the airport in a daze. I had no itinerary, no reservations, only the instinct to escape. And yet somehow I wasn't afraid. For years, fear had dictated my every move. Fear of disappointing, of failing, of being cast aside. But now I realized I had already been cast aside. Kristen had made that clear. The only difference was that this time, I was choosing the casting. I found a modest seaside inn after a short cab ride. The building was painted in cheerful shades of turquoise and white, with a wide porch that overlooked the ocean. The innkeeper, a silver-haired man named David, greeted me with a smile that reminded me of Frank's old fishing buddy. "First time in Hawaii?" he asked as he handed me the keys. "Yes," I admitted, my voice shaky but tinged with awe. "Well," he said with a wink, "you picked the perfect time to run away from the cold." His words startled me, as though he had peeked into my soul. But instead of correcting him, I laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse but real all the same. That night, I sat on the balcony of my small room, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. Waves crashed against the shore in rhythmic applause, as though the universe itself were cheering me on. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, messages piling up. I didn't check them. I wasn't ready. For once I wanted silence. For once I wanted Christmas to belong to me. But the silence was not permanent. Back in my son's house, panic had begun to brew. Kristen, ever the orchestrator, had her plans unraveling in real time. The catered chaos of Christmas dinner for 40 people suddenly seemed less achievable without her free labor. She had expected me to fall in line as always. She hadn't anticipated that I would simply vanish. Robert called my phone first, his messages starting polite, then frantic. "Mom, where are you? Kristen says you stormed off. Are you okay?" Then more desperate. "Mom, please, the family is arriving tomorrow. We need you." Need. That word again. But they didn't need me. They needed my hands, my labor, my sacrifice. They needed the version of me that had erased herself. The next day I strolled barefoot along the beach, the sand cool beneath my toes, the ocean stretching endlessly in front of me. Children laughed as they chased waves, couples held hands, surfers rode the tide with fearless abandon. Life unfolded without expectation, without someone demanding I serve. I breathed it in like oxygen to a small cafe by the shore. I ordered pineapple pancakes and coffee. The waitress, a woman around my age with sun-kissed skin, asked if I was visiting family. "No," I said after a pause. "Just myself." She smiled knowingly. Sometimes that's the best company. I thought of Kristen then, probably pacing around her kitchen, snapping orders at Robert, scrambling to fill the gap I had left. A small, almost guilty thrill coursed through me. Not because I wanted them to fail, but because for once their success or failure wasn't on my shoulders. That night, as Christmas Eve lights twinkled along the beachfront, I sat by the shore and finally allowed myself to open my phone. Dozens of messages lit up the screen. Robert's voice messages were filled with confusion and pleading. Kristen's texts, however, grew sharper with each hour. Selfish. Irresponsible. How could you abandon your family like this? Abandon. Another weaponized word. But I hadn't abandoned my family. I had abandoned my prison. As the tide rolled in, I whispered into the darkness, "This isn't abandonment. This is survival." Meanwhile, back home the dinner was unraveling. Kristen, desperate to maintain appearances, had tried to take charge herself. But cooking for 40 wasn't as simple as issuing orders. The turkey was undercooked, the side dishes bland, the timing disastrous. Guests whispered behind polite smiles, noting the absence of the woman who had always held everything together. Kristen's temper flared, snapping at caterers, scolding Robert, her mask slipping. And Robert, my poor son, torn between defending his wife and missing his mother. He left voicemails tinged with regret. "Mom, I'm sorry if Kristen upset you. Maybe we asked too much. Please just come back. We'll figure it out." But I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to return to the same cycle. Not yet. Christmas morning dawned in Hawaii with golden light spilling across the horizon. I sat on the balcony with coffee in hand, and for the first time in decades, I felt peace on Christmas Day.
No rache, no inglês chores, no tanques exhaustiam.
Just me, the ocean, and the knowledge that I had chosen this. Later, I joined a group tour to explore the island, waterfalls hidden in lush jungles, volcanic craters stretching into the sky, villages alive with music and dance. Each step away from my old life felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had forgotten existed. But even as I marveled at the beauty around me, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was only the beginning. Back home, the cracks in Kristen's perfect facade were widening. My absence had forced the truth into the open. They had relied on me not out of love, but out of convenience. And now that I was gone, they would have to face what life without me truly looked like. As the sun set that evening, casting golden ripples across the Pacific, I realized something powerful. I hadn't just escaped. I had declared war in the only way I could, by refusing to play their game anymore. And deep down, I knew the reckoning had only just begun. The days in Hawaii unfolded like chapters in a book I hadn't realized I'd been longing to read. Each sunrise felt like a fresh page, each sunset like a promise that tomorrow would bring something new. For years, Christmas had been about everyone else. Their needs, their expectations, their joy, while mine slipped quietly into the shadows. But here, surrounded by swaying palms and the endless ocean, Christmas had been about me, and that thought both comforted and unsettled me. On my third morning at the inn, I walked down to the beach at dawn. The sand was cool underfoot, the sky blushing with streaks of pink and orange. I carried a notebook I had bought at a small souvenir shop, its cover decorated with hibiscus flowers. I hadn't journaled in decades, but as I sat watching the tide roll in, words spilled out. Not polished, not even coherent at times, just raw feelings, confessions, memories that I left because they didn't see me anymore. I left because I was suffocating. I left because if I stayed, I'd disappear completely. As I wrote, tears blurred the ink, but they weren't the bitter tears of servitude. They were cleansing, the kind that washed away years of silence. But back home, silence was not what Kristen had. Christmas night had been a disaster. Guests had whispered behind their wine glasses, exchanging pointed looks when dishes came out under-seasoned or cold. Aunts and cousins who had always taken my quiet labor for granted suddenly noticed my absence. "Where's Margaret?" they asked. "She always makes the best stuffing. Isn't it odd she isn't here?" Kristen had smiled tightly, offering excuses. She wasn't feeling well, she needed rest. But the whispers grew, the doubts creeping in. For the first time, Kristen's control slipped. And Robert, caught in the middle, bore the brunt of her frustration. That I didn't know all of this at the time. I only knew what the voicemails on my phone told me. Robert's voice had gone from confusion to apology, to something heavier. "Mom, people are asking about you. Kristen said you left, but I don't understand. Did something happen? Please talk to me." The guilt pricked at me as I sat on the lanai sipping tropical fruit juice. I loved my son. That had never changed. But loving him had meant swallowing my voice for too long, letting his wife dictate the terms of my existence. Loving him had almost cost me myself. At the inn, I met other travelers, a retired couple from Oregon, a young woman who had quit her corporate job, a family celebrating a milestone. Each of them carried their own stories of escape, reinvention, and courage. And as we shared meals together, I realized I wasn't alone. So many people reached a breaking point in life, a moment when staying meant erasure, and leaving meant salvation. One evening, as we sat around a bonfire on the beach, the young woman, Claire, asked me, "So what brought you here?" I hesitated, staring into the flames. Then, with a shaky breath, I told them the truth. About the daughter-in-law who ordered me around like staff, the 40-person Christmas dinner, the years of thankless servitude, about how I had finally said no. They listened in silence. And when I finished, Claire leaned forward and said softly, "You didn't run away. You reclaimed yourself. That's strength." Her words lodged in my chest, glowing like embers. Strength. Was that what this was? All this time I had thought of myself as weak for tolerating it, guilty for leaving. But maybe, just maybe, walking away was the bravest thing I had ever done. Meanwhile, Kristen was unraveling. That I didn't have to be there to picture it. The sharp edge in her voice, the way she blamed Robert for not keeping me in line, the resentment boiling beneath her perfectly curated exterior. She thrived on appearances, and my absence had been the one crack that allowed everyone to glimpse the truth. That she wasn't the gracious hostess, the perfect daughter-in-law, but a woman who had built her comfort on someone else's back. Robert's messages grew more desperate. "Mom, please, Kristen is furious. But I don't care about the dinner. I care about you. I'm worried. Just tell me where you are." I closed my eyes, listening to his voice. My boy. Still there, somewhere beneath the layers of Kristen's influence. But he hadn't stopped her, had he? He hadn't shielded me. He had let me carry the weight until I couldn't anymore. And forgiveness would not come so easily. On the 5th day, I rented a small car and drove along the Hannah Highway, winding through cliffs and waterfalls, the ocean crashing against rocks below. The road was narrow, treacherous at times, but exhilarating. Each curve reminded me of the path I had taken. Risky, uncertain, but worth it. I stopped at a viewpoint where the sea stretched endlessly, foaming white against the black volcanic rock. Standing there, the wind in my hair, I felt Frank beside me again. Not as a ghost, but as a memory that pulsed with life. "Don't let them take your life away, Margaret. Promise me you'll live." "I'm trying, Frank," I whispered. "I'm really trying." That night, I finally responded to Robert's messages. Not with details, not with an apology, but with a simple truth. "I'm safe. I need space. Please respect that." His reply came within minutes. "I love you, Mom. I just want you to be happy. But please come home soon. Home. The word stung. Because what was home now? A house where I was unwanted except as free labor? Or this place where I could breathe, where my heart could remember what it felt like to be alive? As I lay in bed, listening to the surf outside, I realized something important. Hawaii wasn't just an escape. It was a reminder. A reminder that I still had choices. That revenge didn't always have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes the quietest rebellion was simply refusing to play the role others had written for you. And yet, deep inside, I knew I wasn't done. Kristen hadn't just overstepped. She had tried to erase me. And if I ever went back, it wouldn't be as the same Margaret she had controlled. It would be as the Margaret who had remembered her worth. And that was the beginning of my true revenge. Back in Chicago, the ripple effect of my absence spread further than Kristen ever imagined. Christmas was supposed to be her triumph, the night she proved to everyone that she could host without me. Instead, it had been her undoing. Guests had gone home whispering, cousins had laughed behind napkins, and Robert had spent the night making excuses for dishes that tasted flat and wine that ran out too quickly. Kristen had slammed doors that night. Neighbors surely heard the echoes of her fury. "Your mother did this on purpose," she spat at Robert, pacing their bedroom like a cornered animal. "She humiliated me in front of everyone." Robert, exhausted and ashamed, had snapped back for the first time in years. "She didn't humiliate you, Kristen. You did that yourself." The marriage that had looked so polished from the outside now cracked like porcelain under too much weight. And I, thousands of miles away, knew none of this in detail yet. All I knew was that my phone buzzed with short, almost frantic messages from Robert, and silence from Kristen to the inn. I found myself settling into a rhythm I hadn't realized I craved. Morning walks on the beach, fresh fruit breakfasts, reading novels I hadn't touched in years. The absence of duty felt strange at first, almost like I was breaking a rule. But with each passing day, the guilt lessened, replaced by a quiet, growing strength. One afternoon, while sipping coffee on the veranda, I overheard two women talking at the next table. They were from California, longtime friends who vacationed together every winter. "Do you ever notice," one of them said, "how women our age just disappear? We become background characters in our own lives." Her words pierced me. That was exactly what had happened to me. And it wasn't because I'd chosen it, it was because others had pushed me into that corner and I had let them. Not anymore. It was around this time that Robert called, his voice shaking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "Mom, I think I finally see it. Everything you were trying to tell me." My heart tightened. "What do you see, Robert?" "That Kristen's been using you. Using us. And I let it happen." He told me about the lies, about the boutique job Kristen had secretly kept, the cash payments she had hidden, the expensive purchases she had blamed on me. He told me about the fight, about how Lucy and Tyler had overheard enough to realize the truth. As he spoke, I felt equal parts vindication and heartbreak. Vindicated because the mask was finally slipping from Kristen's face. Heartbroken because it had taken my absence for Robert to see what had been in front of him all along. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I let it get this far." For years, those were the words I had silently begged to hear. And now that I did, they didn't land the way I thought they would. Forgiveness wasn't automatic. Wounds didn't close overnight. But the apology was a crack in the wall, and for the first time light seeped through. After we hung up, I walked down to the shore. The tide was low, the wet sand shimmering like glass. Children built sandcastles nearby, their laughter bright against the crash of waves. I stood there, letting the ocean wind whip against my face, and I made a decision. If I ever went back, it would be on my terms. No longer as the quiet servant in the background, but as the woman who had chosen herself. Meanwhile, Kristen was spiraling. She had always thrived on control, but now control slipped from her fingers like sand through a sieve. Robert had started questioning her stories. The children had begun noticing the inconsistencies. Even her friends, the ones she had impressed with carefully staged social media posts, began to distance themselves. No one liked a woman who couldn't keep her own household intact. Kristen tried one last desperate move. She spoke to a lawyer, inquiring about power of attorney over me, her mother-in-law. The audacity of it would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. She spun a story about my supposed instability, about my sudden disappearance as proof that I wasn't capable of handling my affairs, but what she didn't know was that Frank, my Frank, had foreseen this. He had left behind a meticulous web of protections, legal documents, and accounts that secured my independence. And now, with my absence stretching into weeks, the protections were activating. A trust fund. A property I hadn't known about. Freedom carefully preserved by a man who had loved me enough to imagine a world where I might need saving from my own family. The day I learned this, I sat in my room at the inn, staring at the ocean until the horizon blurred. Frank had seen me. Even in death he had seen me. And for the first time in years, I felt truly protected. Kristen's plans, though elaborate, were doomed, because she had underestimated me. She thought I was the same Margaret she had dismissed, ordered around, and silenced. But she was about to learn what it meant when a woman like me chose not to be invisible anymore. I began sketching out ideas in my notebook. Not revenge in the traditional sense. Not screaming matches or lawsuits. Something quieter, sharper, undeniable. The kind of revenge that left no scars on me, only on her pride. And with every word I wrote, the fire in me grew stronger. Kristen wanted me to cook her Christmas dinner. Instead, I had cooked up my escape. Now it was time to serve her the consequences. When my flight back from Hawaii touched the runway, I felt something heavy in my chest. Not fear, not guilt, but the strange weight of power. For the first time in decades, I was returning to my family not as the submissive, ever-obliging mother-in-law who'd bent herself into knots for everyone else, but as a woman who had chosen herself. And I knew down to the marrow, that my return was going to sting for them in ways they hadn't prepared for. Revenge wasn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was absence. And sometimes it was the audacity of choosing joy over servitude. The airport was buzzing with holiday chaos, travelers dragging suitcases plastered with gift ribbons, families reuniting with tears, and harried parents juggling toddlers. I stepped through the crowd with a calm so deliberate it almost felt rebellious. My phone buzzed for the 100th time, my daughter-in-law's name flashing across the screen. She'd called, texted, left voicemails, each one escalating from polite inquiries to threats wrapped in sarcasm. I didn't answer a single one. Not then, not now. My silence was my weapon, and she hated it. When the cab pulled up outside my penthouse, I felt the faintest smile tug at my lips. From the sidewalk, I could already see the tension. My son pacing near the window, my daughter-in-law's silhouette stiff and furious. They'd been waiting. Good. Let them wait. For once, they could stew in the discomfort instead of me. The elevator ride up was slow, almost cinematic. With every ding, I replayed Christmas morning in my mind. The frantic calls, the realization that I wasn't slaving over a stove, that their grand, perfectly orchestrated dinner for 40 had collapsed without me. I imagined the looks on their faces as guests realized the hostess had abandoned ship, as catered food arrived late and cold, as laughter turned to whispers. My absence wasn't just noticed, it was a scandal. And scandals have long memories. The penthouse door flew open before I could even slide the key in. My daughter-in-law stood there, her face a carefully painted mask cracking at the edges. Rage sat in her eyes, but behind it humiliation glimmered like a raw wound. "Well," she spat, arms crossed. "Look who decided to show up. Did Hawaii treat you well while we were left to pick up the pieces of your disappearance?" I set my suitcase down gently, unhurried. "Hawaii was paradise," I said softly, letting each word drip with calm. Peaceful. Warm. Free. The way her jaw tightened told me everything. My joy was salt in her wound. My son appeared behind her, looking torn between anger and something else, shame maybe, or realization. "Mom," he started, his voice low. "Do you even understand what you've done? 40 people, our friends, our colleagues, you embarrassed us." I turned to him, meeting his eyes with a steady firmness he wasn't used to. "No, son. I didn't embarrass you. You embarrassed yourselves. You treated me like unpaid labor, like a servant who owed you her back, her time, her life. I made a choice to remind you that I'm not your maid. I'm your mother. And I deserve respect." For the first time, he had no retort. His mouth opened, then closed. My daughter-in-law, however, wasn't about to let me claim even a sliver of victory. She stepped forward, her voice rising like brittle glass ready to shatter. "You think you're some kind of hero because you ran off? Do you know what I went through? I had to explain to everyone why you weren't there. I had to scramble for catering, for seating, for everything. People were talking, laughing behind my back. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I tilted my head slightly. So they laughed at you, not at me? Interesting. Maybe now you know how it feels to be undervalued, dismissed, expected to carry a burden without thanks. Maybe humiliation is the only language you'll understand. Her face flushed crimson. For a moment, I thought she might actually slap me again like she had at the wedding. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because deep down she knew. This wasn't her territory anymore. The penthouse, the wealth, the independence, none of it belonged to her. And for the first time, she couldn't twist me into submission. The living room was still half decorated from the holiday, tinsel drooping, empty glasses scattered across the coffee table. Evidence of a party gone wrong. I could almost smell the bitterness still lingering in the air, stronger than pine or cinnamon. I moved past them, setting my suitcase by the stairs, claiming my space with quiet defiance. Where are you going? My daughter-in-law snapped, spinning toward me. To unpack. To make myself tea. To live in my home. This isn't just your home, she fired back. This is our home and we had rules. You don't just get to. Rules. I cut her off, turning slowly. You mean your rules? The ones that say I should break my back so you can sip wine and take credit for hosting? The rules where my time, my labor, my existence are nothing but extensions of your convenience. My voice wasn't raised, but it was sharp enough to slice through the tension. Silence hung for a beat. My son shifted uncomfortably, looking at his wife as though seeing her tantrum in a new light. She faltered, then forced a laugh, brittle and false. You're being dramatic. All we asked for was help. No, I said, finally letting the steel in my voice surface. You demanded slavery. And when I refused, you slapped me. Do you remember that? At the wedding? The day you crossed the line from entitled to abusive? That's when I decided enough was enough. That's when I started planning. Christmas wasn't a vacation, it was my revenge. And it worked. The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. The ripples stretched across the room. My son's face fell, realization dawning slow and heavy. My daughter-in-law's lips trembled, her veneer cracking further. You, she whispered, as though the thought had never crossed her mind. You actually planned this? Of course I did, I replied. Did you think I'd just keep absorbing the disrespect forever? No. I wanted you to feel what I felt, powerless, small, humiliated. And from what I hear, you felt it in front of 40 people. She sank onto the sofa, the fight draining out of her. For once, silence was her only answer. My son rubbed a hand over his face, torn between loyalty and truth. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have stopped it before it got this far. I let her push you. I let myself believe you'd always bend. I never thought you'd stand up for myself. I finished for him, my tone gentle but firm. That's what mothers are supposed to teach their children, son. Maybe it's not too late for you to learn. The rest of the evening unfolded not with yelling, but with an uneasy quiet. Every word I spoke, every step I took, was proof that I wasn't the same woman they'd cornered into submission. My revenge wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It was the calm after the storm, the realization that they no longer controlled me, and as I sipped my tea by the window, watching snow drift lazily against the city lights, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, but peace I knew was only temporary. Because once a power shift happens in a family, it doesn't settle quietly. It festers, it changes dynamics, it forces everyone to pick sides. And I could see it in my daughter-in-law's eyes as she stared at me from across the room. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The snow was still falling the next morning, blanketing the city in a quiet calm that felt almost deceptive. But inside the penthouse, silence was no peace. It was tension, coiled and sharp, the kind that settled into bones and refused to let go. My daughter-in-law hadn't said much after my return. She'd sulked, retreated into herself, probably plotting the next move. But I knew her type. Control was an addiction, and withdrawal wasn't going to be graceful. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, steam curling into the winter air, when I heard her footsteps. They were sharp, deliberate, heels clicking against the marble floor. She entered the kitchen dressed immaculately, makeup flawless, but her eyes betrayed her, dark rings of sleeplessness, anger festering behind them. Are you proud of yourself? She asked, voice trembling with venom. Do you feel like you've won? I set the cup down gently, savoring the moment before I spoke. It's not about winning. It's about balance. Respect. Something you never gave me. She let out a bitter laugh, pacing across the room. Respect? You want respect? You had a roof over your head, meals at your table, a family to keep you company. I cut her off, my voice low but steady. No. What I had was a gilded cage. And the moment I stopped playing by your rules, you showed me what you really thought of me. You slapped me at a wedding. You demanded I cook for 40 people. You treated me as if my only value was what I could provide you. That isn't family. That's exploitation. Her composure cracked. She slammed her hand against the counter. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Do you know how hard it is to build a reputation? To be seen as the perfect hostess, the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law? And you ruined it. All of it. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. So that's what this is about. Not family. Not love. Reputation. Appearances. You wanted me to break my back so you could shine. For a second she faltered, eyes darting away. That was the truth she didn't want to admit. My son walked in then. His tie askew, his face pale. He looked between us, exhaustion etched into his features. Enough, he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. This has to stop. She turned on him, desperation dripping from her words. Can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to turn you against me. She's trying to take everything we've built. But he didn't bite. He sighed, rubbing his temples. No, she's not. She's just standing up for herself. Something I should have supported years ago. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, betrayal, disbelief. She wasn't used to losing allies, least of all her husband. You're siding with her? She whispered, voice breaking. I'm not siding with anyone, he replied. I'm just tired. Tired of pretending this is normal. Tired of watching you push and push until she has nothing left to give. Mom was right. We crossed a line. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. She looked at him as though he'd stabbed her. But the truth was simple. Her control was slipping through her fingers like sand, and I stood then, slow and deliberate, each step across the kitchen floor echoing like a verdict. I stopped inches from her, close enough for her to see the steadiness in my eyes. You wanted me broken, I said quietly. But all you did was free me. I'm not your servant. I'm not your scapegoat. And from this day forward I set the terms of my life. Not you. Not anyone else. Her lips parted, but no words came. She was trembling now, the weight of her defeat pressing down, and I picked up my suitcase, the one I hadn't fully unpacked yet, and carried it upstairs. My son followed me halfway, stopping at the landing. His voice was soft, almost pleading. Mom, are you leaving again? I turned, meeting his gaze. Not leaving. Just moving on. If I stay here, I'll always be pulled back into her games. I need space. Freedom. My own life. He swallowed hard, then nodded. I understand. And for the first time I believed he did. That afternoon I signed papers transferring the penthouse into a trust in my own name. No one, not my son, not my daughter-in-law, would have access without my consent. Financially, emotionally, physically, I was untethered from them. The look on her face when she realized was the sweetest revenge of all. She'd thought slapping me, ordering me around, humiliating me in front of guests would break me. Instead, it had forged me into steel. As I locked the door to the guest room that had once been mine, I glanced one last time at her. She sat on the sofa, rigid, her eyes wet but cold, like a queen stripped of her crown. You'll regret this, she hissed. I smiled. No. You will. And with that I walked out, the snow crunching beneath my boots, the city lights flickering like promises of a future I'd finally claimed. My revenge wasn't about destroying her, it was about reclaiming me. And that, I knew, was the kind of revenge that lasted forever. She thought she could control me forever, but instead she lost everything the moment I chose myself. And if you think my revenge ended here, wait until you hear what happened next.